All right, Kat Bradley, welcome to the Single Track Podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So I think the vast majority of people that listen to the show are already very familiar with you and your place in the sport. And for those that aren't, I think I'll just link to other shows you've been on in the past where you kind of delve deep into your background. But we are recording this in mid-October 2022, and I think it's always good to check in. Like, what's up with you right now? Like, what's getting you most excited about life these days?
That's a good question. I feel like, I have a ton going on right now. That's all exciting and new and it's keeping me really busy and engaged. I just started my own podcast, so that is pretty huge. It's the BRAD podcast, and it launched yesterday. With that, I started a newsletter and just redid my website, catbrad.com, just because I wanted a way to engage with the community that's not just social media, and a way to, I'm all big on self-expression. And I think the people that, have met me in the sport kind of know that. And I just love talking to people and, love talking about the sport. So that was kind of the goal in that. And then I'm also I'm gearing up for Puerto, Vallarta, which is coming up here in a couple weeks. It's a 100-miler at the end of October. And, I had just a few years of almost no training and just not being able to get in a groove. And, so on top of launching this podcast, I'm also training more than I have in 3 years. So staying busy on that front. And then also I'm getting married, new thing,
Hey,
so
congrats.
that's, planning a wedding. Yeah, thanks. I'm so stoked. And Carson, my partner's really stoked. And it's just wild to, plan a wedding. And we were like, we don't want to be engaged for 2 years, so we, are getting married in February, and there's a lot of boxes to check. And I am disorganized, so I'm not a great person to plan a wedding, but it's been fun, and we're doing it together. And then also, what else is going on? And then, my stuff, I'm coaching and working with brands, and so it's, just a lot of staying busy, and really, I feel like for the first time in a long time, I've got ducks in a row, which is, thank God.
That's great to hear. I took a bunch of notes there, and one thing that stuck out, you mentioned doing UTMB Mexico later this month, and I think that is a relatively new race on a lot of listeners' radar, and there's so many other events going on right now, like Javelin is in a couple weeks. I know you're very familiar with that. There's the World Champs in November, Ultra Trail Cape Town. There's so many other concurrent events happening. I'm curious what drew you to that event, because it looks kind of exotic and exciting to me.
Well, that's one reason alone is it's exotic and exciting. Another huge reason is that it's part of the UTMB race series, and to race UTMB and then to qualify as elite, that whole system changed. So I don't know what I'm going to race really for 2023 exactly, but UTMB is always on the list, and I'd like to keep my options open until I really hardcore decide. But also, I had a disappointing CCC, and for a lot of reasons. I hurt my knee 3 weeks before, and it was a purple sack before the start, and idiotically, I was idiotic optimism is really good sometimes. And in this case, I think it was good too. I'm glad I started. But it was foolish to, I was limping after my long runs up until the Friday before the Friday race. And so I just, I after CCC, I was DNFing, I just changed my mindset, and I was I have to, if I get hurt like this, if I'd addressed it like a professional and seen someone about it instead of been I hit my knee all the time, it's no big deal, and limped away from that, I maybe I could have finished. And so just like that mindset shift of like, okay, I'm not going to ignore the little things when something happens. And this is a long-winded answer to say, like,
no, this is great.
I had this like this flip switch after CCC where I was like, okay, and I've been in the process of changing stuff, but I was like, something needs to change. I need to like stop messing around, and still messing around in a fun way, but like, I knew there was something severely wrong with my knee, and I just, that mindset of being like, it's fine. Like that's, that there's sometimes when you have to take a step back and be like, okay, I'm going to take the concrete steps to fix this. And like, or like in training, like, okay, I'm going to take concrete steps to plan my week to make sure I get all my running in, even though I'm super busy.
Yeah.
And, this opportunity of running 100 miles in October is that, it's me, as I said earlier, getting my ducks in a row and practicing that. And I really wanted to race again either way this season after CCC. But I, want to do it within the UTMB series. I wanted to do it soon, with making sure I was healthy and got a training block in. And, I wanted to go back to what I have had the most success in, which is hundreds. I really like that distance, and while I want to keep getting better at all the distances, I want to like feel myself in a place where I thrive again. And that tends to be in like the back half of 100, knock on desk. I hope that's still the case. I've done it since 2019, but dog.
Well, you mentioned a lot of interesting stuff there. And a little bit earlier, you mentioned that at least until recently, there had been years of little training, and it was tough to find motivation. It was tough to find a groove. And I said we weren't going to go back in time, but 5 years ago, you won Western States. And I think at that point you had been in the sport for a while, but to a lot of people, you kind of quote came out of nowhere. I think to set the table for where I want to go, can you talk about how your life changed when that moment happened, and whether you were kind of ready for everything that followed, like being a winner of Western States and having like a new, I don't want to say target on your back, but like you're a known entity at that point?
Yeah, I didn't ever think about what would happen after Western States when I was training for Western. Like I was super focused in training and like had huge goals, and worked towards them. I was really methodical with the training and with my day to day, and was, intentional going into that race, but I never thought about what happened after. I never thought about like the repercussions of that. I just, I'm believed in myself, and I'm extremely competitive and passionate. And so like when I got into that race, I was like, obviously I'm going to aim to have the best day I could. And, while I was unknown in the sport for like the general public, like the women in the field knew who I was from running with them, and from, I've been racing really solid for a couple years before that. It was just like I hadn't gotten an opportunity to line up on a start line like Western. And I think after that I was like all of a sudden shocked with how it became like, before I was chasing something like a wild dream, and that is like amazing. And then when it happens, and there's a couple things that happen. Like first, it's like, what's next?
Yeah.
Second, you can never go into anything incognito again, and that's kind of a superpower, being like, yeah, totally. I'm just a great way to put it. Chill. I'm not, like I am, it's really powerful to to know what you're capable of, but to be underestimated. There's no better place to be, I think, as a competitor. And then after, you can't line up on a start line again without being picked as a favorite. And then I've always, when I'm not successful at something and when I'm in the process of trying, that's where I'm happiest. And then when I achieve it, it's really hard, because then I didn't have a what's next, and that was what the brands that I'd signed with were asking me, and that's what everyone was asking me, and I didn't have one, and I didn't have anything that I was, aside from the Grand Canyon FKT, which I did immediately after.
Yeah.
I didn't have anything like burning that same fire. And then I was, there's just so much that happens when you aren't expecting it or you're not expecting the outcome. I was teaching before and I got laid off as a teacher. So it happened at a perfect time, but then I also didn't have anything else, immediately after to look towards or to focus on.
You used the word repercussions early on there. What were some of in your opinion, what were some of the repercussions or just some of the negative impacts that you didn't anticipate post Western States?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that is really, difficult to talk to, and that, I'm at peace with now, but was confusing and sad to me early on, is I went from just being able to be friends with, anyone in the sport that I met, into being a threat to some of the other women in the sport. And, some people, and it's faded now, and I think it's been recognized that was not okay, but other women in the sport, and not most of the women in the sport were really wonderful and amazing. Most of the other top competitors. So this is just the few, but it shocked me. Were not nice to me, actively bullying me. I felt like I was in back in high school, where I also was not generally loved by the popular girls. And so I was what is going on? All these people that I've looked up to and I've been excited to run, or a select few, I shouldn't say all these women, a select few women's were nasty comments to me on start lines, and just really not nice to me. And I didn't know, and some of them I were my friends before, and I just didn't understand. And so that was a repercussion that was really hurtful, and I was all of a sudden isolated. I felt really, and something I was embarrassed about at the time. I was what is wrong with me? And then I'm about to cry. It was really hard.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And then also the pressure that I didn't expect, when I was chasing that dream of winning Western, there wasn't any pressure except for the pressure I put on myself. And, when you zoom out, it's all pressure that you put on yourself, and I can recognize that now. But back then, I was oh, I have the pressure from the whole community now. All the community expects this from me. And that, wasn't the case. No one thinks twice about your success. It's all internal. But I the pressure that I put on myself that made me a good athlete and competitive, all of a sudden turned toxic. And that was another huge repercussion. Yeah. And then the last one I'd say is just, and it happened to coincide with me getting laid off as a kindergarten teacher.
Yeah.
And having income from running, was all right, now I have all this time to train, so I guess I'm going to train, and I went and oh, I'm going to train a pro, and which, can mean a very different thing if you aren't professional about it and you don't know what that means. I think right now a lot of trail runners and are full-time pros and they're thriving, but when it just like almost when you didn't expect it and you don't know how to deal with it and you don't have like a lot of people to talk to about it, like, hey, like, how do I do this? Like, it's just, you get crazy and obsessive, and like, the obsessive behaviors that like work when you're like have to be very intentional and structured because you're also working full time.
Yeah.
Like it like doesn't work when applied to a schedule with like all the time in the world.
Well, first things first, I wanted to thank you for sharing that story. And to me, it's inspirational because my hope is that whether it's a year from now or a couple years from now, there's somebody who has a similar path to you. Maybe they just want to race like Western States or UTMB or Leadville, and they're new to the sport, and all of these opportunities and changes are coming. They can listen to a conversation like this and maybe feel less alone and feel like at least there's some sort of playbook or role model out there to look to. So I think it's super awesome what you're saying.
Oh, thank you. It's crazy to talk about like 5 years. It's been like a while now, but you know, it feels like every time I talk about it, even though I've grown so much since then, it like feels like yesterday.
With your sponsorship in that case, Solomon, like the day after you win Western States, do you just have like every single brand knocking on your door and everybody who's anybody wanting to talk to you, stuff like that? Can you talk about what that was like?
Yeah. It was crazy. I won Western States, and then, you have the award ceremony on Sunday. And then Monday I wake up to like over, 25 emails about like sponsorship inquiries, like, and then I have to, that's a whole other thing. I have to go through like these negotiations, and this agent like reached out to me and was like, I've already talked to a bunch of people on your behalf. I'm like, what? Like, why? And I'm like, he's like, and then not, again, like not having people to talk to about it, not having like a lot of people that I'm, it's the sport has grown like so much in the last 5 years where there's more people to talk to about contracts and like opportunity and what you're worth and what you deserve. So I had no idea what to expect. So what I ended up doing is reaching out to all the like men that I knew. I'd heard like, okay, the one thing that I do know is women are underpaid still. Like, I remember hearing someone talk about, what, like a man and a woman on the same team were paid, and it was just like appalling. And I knew both of them personally. And so I just reached out to like every guy I knew in the sport with a paid contract. And I was like, I know you don't have to tell me. I know you probably shouldn't in your contract, but like I'm trying to make sure I get what I'm paid or get paid what I'm worth. And so I just reached out to everyone just to get an idea. And like about half of them were comfortable enough sharing that information to help. And I'm so grateful. And then I just, had to figure it out from that. And I ended up signing with Salomon. I'd already been a Salomon ambassador. And I signed a 3-year contract, 3.5-year contract with them that I signed. I wish I just like wanted to get the whole process over with. And I wish I'd explored my options a little bit more, but some of the people that I talked to in negotiating contracts with, it was like very intimidating and scary. Like, first of all, they're all men that were controlling the conversation, and I was susceptible to being like, I'm a total people pleaser, and I was susceptible to like just like bowing down, and like and it took a lot of guts to be like, well, I think I deserve a little more, based on like this information of people that I can't tell you who gave me what they're getting paid, So I just wanted the whole thing over with. And I that relationship with Solomon, I'd been a Solomon ambassador with them. So that's kind of how I ended up there.
It blows my mind. Well, I guess it doesn't blow my mind, but it's still to some extent shocking to me that even 5 years ago, these pay disparities were still an issue. And I'm assuming that they're still an issue today. I know I've talked to a couple brands where they're trying to rectify it, or in some cases they've solved it. But that's wild to me. Did you ever have any conversations with people inside the brands that gave an explanation for why it was the case, or was it just kind of like not even addressed?
I think now I'd have the confidence to have those conversations, but it wasn't addressed. I'd say like I think I'd bring up men. I'd be like, I'm pretty sure the other like men on your team are getting paid more, but that was kind of swept under the rug, and they'd like give me 5,000 more or something in the offer. But
Wow.
yeah, to answer your question, I know that pay gap in contracts is definitely still there. Even when I was negotiating in 2020 after I left Solomon, it was I know I have an agent now, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But just in asking, I have these same conversations, and I'm so lucky that a lot of the men in this sport like see why and understand why I'm like asking specifics about their contract, and it's still there.
Yeah.
It's hardly gotten better. Within a few brands it is, but it's hardly gotten better.
Well, just from everything I'm hearing, it seems like you have so much wisdom to share on this whole process. And I think you've touched on a few of them already, but if you could sum it up, what are some of the other benefits of having gone through this process where it wasn't necessarily a fairy tale post Western States?
Like talking about all of it. I'd say man, and you're just talking to me now where I feel like I'm just now really on the other side of it.
I was going to say, it seems like things are great. Yeah.
Yeah, things are really good. And honestly, it's never been better. But it took going through like insane lows to get here. And, I feel like going through those lows makes me really appreciate who I am now. I feel like I can maybe help to be a mentor to other women coming into the sport as it helps to grow. I might have a different answer in like 6 months when this steady feeling, it doesn't feel so new. It's been like, growing just within the last year. But I'd say just, running, I tell my athletes, like, if you feel like you're running away from, then it's probably not sustainable.
Yeah.
But if you feel like you're running to, like, then you're probably growing something great. And by that, I mean, like, if you're starting a run to finish a run, meaning you're just like getting it over with, or if you're like running because like your home life is really bad, or if you're running away from like being afraid of getting a poor result, versus running to like starting a run because you enjoy every second of that run, even if it's a hard run, you're like enjoying that process of that run, and you're not starting a run just to finish a run. That's not the goal of the run, is to finish the run. It's to be present within the run. And like, if you're, and if like you're thinking about how grateful you are on the runs, and obviously not every run is going to be like this, but it's just like an attitude shift, where I feel like one is like frantic and desperate, and the other one is like secure and not dependent on anything except for the process and enjoying the process. And I feel like just learning that, and I was able to understand that logically before I went through this whole like 5-year roller coaster.
Yeah.
But being able to live it is totally different. And I feel like it's I'm a happy person now, like a genuinely happy person.
Yeah.
I feel like really secure in my life, even like when it's stressful or hard. And I feel secure in my running, even though like results aren't reflecting it right now. Like I feel like I'm starting over and just chipping away at that brick. And I like, and to feel secure in that instead of to always like finish a race and like win, and then to feel like still desperate, like it was never enough and never good enough. But like, it's just a different mentality when you're like running to rather than away from.
And I should say for the record, you obviously had a fantastic Western States, but after that you had a rim to rim FKT, you had a top 10 at UTMB, you had a podium at Leadville. So I didn't mean to cut the story off at Western. You had some great results
No problem.
through the pandemic for sure.
Yeah, and then but like it's the same thing, they were great results, but like I was like, I never felt them.
Yeah.
Because I was just like, I thought I wasn't doing enough. So, but that's the biggest lesson I think in these last 5 years.
You said something interesting that you didn't feel the good results. What does that mean? That's very interesting to me.
Yeah, I think like Western States I definitely felt, but that was the one, and then there's no expectations before Western, but after Western, like there was all these expectations. And so like whatever result I had, I felt like it should have and could have been better, or, even like when I was winning or doing really well, I just like, it just was like, I just like didn't care because I thought I could have done better. Even though I like the racing itself, I still really enjoyed. I was like happy within the racing. But then I'd be like, okay, I need to like do better than that next time. And there's like a difference between being like, oh, I like can do better than that. I think that's healthy. And I think there's always ways to improve, but when it's like, desperate, you have to do better for some like a different reason, then it's, then it can spiral really quickly.
I want to change gears just a little bit. You mentioned early on in the conversation that you're big on self-expression, which I think is super cool. And you've got this podcast now. And I want to talk about that for a bit because I feel like the vast majority of athletes in our sport, they kind of stick to the Instagram lane when it comes to telling their story and working on behalf of the brands. And you're kind of more actively making the move into the written word and long form audio. So can you talk a bit about your thoughts and feelings there and like what prompted that project?
Yeah, totally. So I had the idea last year when I was in Iceland with some friends. I was just like thinking about it, and I was like, I think I could be good at that, and I think it'd be something that would be really fun for me and wouldn't feel like, it wouldn't feel forced. Sometimes I have a really difficult time with Instagram. That medium is not somewhere I thrive. You've just heard me ramble for like the last 20 minutes or something, just like pure rambling. And like, while maybe some people don't like that, that's not some people's way to consume. Like that's my way to express, and I hate taking photos. Like I hate and I don't mind when I'm by myself and I'm on a run and I'm like, I see like this morning, it was like, I was running and it was sunrise and it was fall and the moon was out and it was beautiful and I took a photo. But like when I'm with people and I like hate taking out my phone, or if I'm like camping, I hate taking out my phone. And, sometimes it's really good. And my partner's an amazing photographer. So like, I'm lucky to have him, but like producing that content on my own is extremely difficult for me. Where like writing and talking is just like, I'm a talker and I'm a writer, and I love my thoughts, kind of stream out in a monologue. And as I'm sure you've noticed in this. And so I just wanted something else other than Instagram to express myself, and then and a way to engage with the community. I love this community, and I love all different types of communities. So the podcast, I'm saying it's not just a running podcast. That's because I want to talk to anyone who I can, because I am so interested in people and the way their minds work. So that's kind of the purpose and what my vision has been for the podcast. And it's evolved a little bit throughout the year, but I really got a kick in the ass to do it when I was, it was clear that I just was not doing a good enough job representing the brands that I love working with, and I not only were my athletics struggling, which, they had been and they have been, but so was my presence on social media. And I was going through some personal life stuff too that made it really difficult to share authentically on social media. And then on top of that, with just running not going well, and I really wasn't training. I had a couple years where my personal life stress was so crazy that I just wasn't training. And my agent Tyler was like, "Kat, you're fucking up." Excuse my language. He's like, "You gotta." Hopefully, I can swear on this. I'm sorry. He was like, "You gotta change something," And then so that started with just okay, I'm going to be better about posting on social media. Okay, I need to start actually acting like an athlete and training, and getting my life organized. And so so everything's not so scattered and I can get stuff done. And then the podcast, once I started biting off small goals and okay, I'm doing the training again. Okay, I'm doing a better job on social media. I was like, I want to do something where I feel like I can represent myself the way I want to, and talk to other interesting people, and then also represent the brands well. And just again, long form. That's where I thrive. So that's kind of the progression of why I wanted to start this podcast.
Well, I want to go a little bit deeper into the podcast in just a second, but I'm curious from your perspective, and I'm sure it's different for every brand, but do you get the sense that companies like Brooks, Solomon, et cetera, encourage athletes when they think about their marketing presence to pick the medium that best suits their interests and talents? Or do you think everybody tends to get cornered into Instagram and they have to do that no matter what?
I think whether it's the brands that corner them or the person, I feel like people do feel cornered into Instagram, and that model, even though it's not working in the same way as it was. But I think it's just the way this marketing is evolving, and Instagram is accessible to everyone, even people who are limited on time. And so that, I think athletes do get cornered into it. And unless you're some athletes could get away with maybe not having a super active social media or online presence or community presence. And anyone can, but your opportunity in the sport is going to be limited in terms of sponsorships. But if you're a Courtney or a Killian or they could walk off social media, and Claire Gallagher did, and she's she's in grad school right now. So she's working a lot and working really hard on things outside of running. But she's dominant and people love her, so she could do it. And but for the vast majority of athletes, it's if you want to have a career in the sport, you have to have an online presence.
Would you ever, I know you mentioned that Instagram wasn't your favorite platform, and again, you prefer podcasting stuff. Do you think there could ever be a day where you'd feel comfortable just saying, I'm only going to be in podcasting, I'm only going to be on my website, and I'm going to pull a Claire, I'm just going to walk away from Instagram, stuff like that?
Yeah, I fantasize about it all the time. I really do. I think, when I was a late to the game Instagrammer, just because like I did not want to be consumed with it. My like name on Instagram at first when I got it in like 2014 was like poop is what we do, because I didn't want anyone to follow me, and I just wanted to like be able to see what my friends were doing, who are runners. And then I kind of through like running opportunity, like I actually like Mountain Hardwear back around 2014. I think they're Mountain Hardwear still. Gave me a pair of free shoes, and they were like, just post on Instagram, but like you have to change your name. And that's how like it's all started. So I fantasize about it all the time. The only thing is like the podcast, now I have a different reason to want to be on it, and it's such a good way to share. But if I could just like have someone else, or just even just post about that, like I would in a heartbeat like post ghost.
Yeah.
No other stuff, but yeah.
Well, hopefully we get to a point in time where we match the person's interests and talents to the medium, and that's all. Like, because I have friends who are just fantastic, like your partner, just like fantastic photographers, and they inspire people through the sport that way. But then there are people like you. I know myself, I'm not an Instagram type person. Like, I don't belong on that platform. I belong where we are here right now. And I wish that there were just more mechanisms in place to let people feel comfortable living in their spiritual homes from a content creation standpoint.
Yeah, me too. And, I think it is starting to happen a little bit. And I hope that like by people like you and me starting podcasts and realizing and openly talking about how that like this is it works for some people, but just not for everyone. This is what works for me. That like other people are encouraged to find their medium, but it takes time, resources, and like real commitment. So but hopefully some people.
What are some conversations? You mentioned that it's not just going to be a running podcast. So I'm curious, what are some of the conversations you're interested in hosting on the platform, and maybe give us a preview on some guests too?
Yeah. Well, I have the next guest that I'm going to be launching is Billy Yang. And he is a runner, but and I'm so stoked for him, but I have other runners, obviously my connections isn't running. But right now I'm also scheduled to interview some climbers and even maybe one professional surfer, which it's looking like it's going to work out. And the idea is I wanted to make sure it wasn't just a running podcast, because I have so many interests, and I'd love to, interview anyone who is, I want to say high achiever, but that's not what I mean. It's because that can be different for anyone. It's like someone who has a craft that they have spent a lot of time in, and really focused or dedicated.
It's like masters,
to.
like mastery.
Yeah, exactly. And I just, I'm so interested in the last couple of years, something that's really helped me. I've had like a lifelong, I was like diagnosed with ADHD when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And like when I would like not hide my medication when I was a kid, throw it away, put it on my tongue. And then, when I was a teacher, that was a great career. A kindergarten teacher is a great career for someone with ADHD, because it's like, my brain's like in a lot of ways like a kindergartner's brain, like pew, 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 and I'm always active and always doing stuff. But in the last couple of years, just like accepting that part of myself and understanding it, like, and that's, ADHD is like such a fun, like some people are like, it doesn't exist. And some people are like, people, and I just, when I was a kid, I just didn't understand it. And in the last few years, just like really understanding how it makes me different, how it makes my brain work. That there are certain things that like I do that like, I just thought something was wrong with me. That I was like, I thought something was wrong with me. And in learning more about ADHD in my adult life, I'm like, oh, thank God, like there's a reason for this, and I'm just not stupid, or I'm not just lazy. I'm trying my best. And so like, but like, it's also part of the reason why I'm a good athlete, and why I, you know, can have creative conversations, and like the creative side of me that I like, and seeing it as like a superpower too. And I think anyone who has, is really good or passionate about it, something, whatever that is, their brains work a little bit differently, you know?
Yeah.
And there's something in there that makes it different, or makes it tick. And I think every person who's good at something, or has mastered something, or is working to master something, their brains, you know, are just a little bit different. And exploring that is, you know, across all boards, across all different crafts, is what I'm interested in, you know. And I just my craft happens to be running. And, you know, so obviously at first I'm going to interview a ton of runners, but I hope that it expands, you know, into just a ton of different interesting people.
It's super cool. I think that in the short run, there's definitely a benefit to niching down, and like you said, having like all runners to start with. But I'm even starting to feel it now myself. Like there's this inner urge to branch out a little bit and maybe interview somebody, like you said, in like the surfing world, or maybe it's election season and you want to interview like a politician on environmental policy or something. Like there's definitely I think it's a good move on your part to leave the door open for whichever conversations you want to have and wherever the paths kind of go. I think it's super smart.
Thanks.
But one thing I wanted to talk about here too, before we transition is, and I use Dylan Bowman as an example a lot, but it seems like with the podcast, and then we haven't talked about it yet, but these running camps you're doing, you're putting together a lot of systems and opportunities that will allow you to stay relevant in the sport beyond when you decide to stop being a professional athlete. And that's just an observation from me, but does that play a part in any of your decision making here? Like, are you interested in being involved in the sport far past, you know, your time as a pro?
Totally. I love this sport, and I, you know, have found such a home here that of course I want to stay in it. And I think like taking the mindset of like, oh, this is so I can stay relevant, and this is so I can have a career. That's true. But like when I've tried to do that in the past, it just hasn't worked out. And so instead, like I'm focusing on like, okay, this is something that I really like to do now. Like these running camps, I love them. I have so much fun. I coach a bunch of athletes too. And so it's an opportunity to get to see them, meet them in person for the first time. Some of them I've been working with for 5 years, and like, that's the first time we meet in person. And like, you know, and then the podcast, like I love talking to people. I love, you know, having these conversations, and the process of editing them and putting them out, and, you know, hearing the feedback. And, I love all the everything. And, you know, the camps and the podcasts are unrelated. Like I started them for 2 different reasons. And like, hopefully it does keep me in this sport in a different way for a long, long time. But I wasn't like actively like, I need to stay relevant. Like I need a career. And I have done that in the past. I have been like, you know, and not necessarily relevant, but I was like actively trying to like, you know, go like do speaking events and like forcing it as a way. But instead of like thinking long term, of just like focusing on the carrot of like, this is work that I really like, you know, this is something that I enjoy and want to keep doing. That it's just like, you know, I think it's, you know, instead when you're at mile 15 of an ultra, you're an idiot if you're thinking about mile 100. You're thinking about the next aid station, you know. And that's kind of what I like. What I feel like I'm doing here is I'm just like getting to like working on little aid stations and little like trails of things that I really enjoy that hopefully will equate to a 100-mile finish or something.
Super cool. Well, I want to make sure we cover these next 2 topics before we close up. And again, I think the theme here is just like, shedding light on important questions that anybody that is in a position similar to you, like either an up and coming athlete or a pro athlete, can anchor onto and find value in. It's not breaking news, but like about a year ago, you switched over to Brooks as your sponsor, which I think is super cool. And they seem to be making a lot of really interesting moves in the trail space in recent years. And I'm wondering if you can talk about first, just your thought process when it comes to changing sponsors and when you know it's time to make a change. And then, yeah, maybe we start there.
Yeah. So I was in a 3-year contract with Solomon, as mentioned. I was in a 3.5-year contract, and that process was a little bit rushed. And almost immediately I realized it wasn't a great fit for me. I really liked some parts of it. Like I loved that there was like team events there. I loved that, getting to go on these like global athlete summits where I'd go to really amazing places with the best athletes in the world. And I loved getting to go to the Annecy Design Center and like having a input or like being in meetings about product and getting to talk to people. And but I like didn't like first of all, like I didn't actually like the shoes. The shoes really gave me huge problems. And so that's the first thing that when I was looking for a new shoe sponsor, which I was actively looking like as soon as I was allowed to and within my contract, I gravitated to Brooks because who I sought out. Like when Tyler and I, my agent, who I hired right before negotiating contracts for 2020, for 2021, I think I signed. I was like, I told him I really would like to work with Brooks just because I have a track and road background. And like, I always wore Brooks there. And then I wore Brooks trail shoes to begin with. And those were like, I hadn't run in Brooks shoes in a really long time, but I always knew from high school, college, that the track and road shoes worked for me. And then I loved the Pure Grits. I like bought them on eBay. Used. I bought used shoes as my first trail shoes, and like they were amazing. And then so I knew it was time then. Like I didn't like the shoes. I also had while the team was cool, I felt like I felt like only appreciated as an athlete instead of as like not like I felt like no one was trying to get to know me as a person too. And I'm just like I'm a thinker and I'm a talker, and I love examining anything with anyone, and like to just be like boxed as an athlete who's like expected to be an athlete 100% of the time was really challenging for me. It worked for some people. Some people really thrive in that, but I didn't. And then the other thing is like, that team was extremely competitive. Like if you weren't like at the top, then you weren't getting invited to the athlete summit, the like global fancy athlete summit, which and to always feel like you're competing with your teammates was not healthy for me.
By the way, I don't know why I'm reminded of this, but you did an episode with Dylan last year, and you talked about your process for reaching out to Brooks. And as somebody who has done like a lot of outbound prospecting and tracking down the right people to connect with, I totally admired your process of like finding the email, going on LinkedIn, going on Facebook. I was like, yes, that is how athletes should do it. I love that.
Yeah. Oh my God. I wanted to work with Brooks so badly. And I love their I don't even, it's so weird because I hadn't run in their shoes in a very long time. And I really didn't know much about the status of the trail team, but like I had this gut feeling that Brooks was the right brand. And I was getting offers from other brands, and I was just like, don't want to give up on Brooks. And Tyler was like, are you sure? Like, we haven't heard a peep from Brooks. We don't even know if they have a trail team. And I'm so glad that it happened. And the whole culture is like, so I think it was like maybe that run happy culture that pulled me to, I had a history with them. It's what I knew. It was like coming home. And then, since they built like the whole run happy campaign, which is like, I wasn't there yet, but that's what I was kind of striving for, is like that run happy thing. And I think running happy is like running fast, no matter how fast it is. So,
Well, you've had a ton of experience interfacing with these brands over the last 5 years. And for any listeners out there that maybe are at a point now where you were at in 2017, do you have any advice for them in terms of best practices or how to handle these relationships and navigate the world as a sponsored athlete?
yeah, definitely. My first piece of advice is take your time in the negotiation process. Like, the impulse is to just get it over with because it's uncomfortable. It's super uncomfortable, especially for women. And luckily they're like, my manager's a woman, Julie. And there's a lot more female managers out there now, hopefully. But like a lot of it, you're talking to men who sometimes like don't even know the sport that well. And it's just hard to ask for stuff and to advocate for yourself. And so you want to speed it up so it's over fast. But take your time and, make sure you're signing with a brand that you're aligned with. And as I said, like start with the shoes. Like, do you actually like the shoes? Like, do not sign with a brand where you don't like the shoes. And that start there and then go through every single line of the contract. And you're like, okay, like, am I being taken advantage of here? Or is this like, are they like, is there a scenario here where I get screwed? And if so, like, you got to think two reasons. Okay. Or two things, you talk to them about it, understand it. And B, if they're like not budging on it, and if it's something that really is going to screw you, be like, okay, is that the type of brand I want to work with that like, is not willing to budge at all on stuff that like is only bad for the athlete. Like it's, and again, all of that takes time. That takes like time and being intentional and asking for help. Like, and if you know anyone, I the first time around, I was like leaning on my friends who are lawyers. I was just reaching out to anyone that I could find and who would talk to me. And,
Yeah.
And I still rushed the process. But don't be afraid to ask for help. Talk openly about the process. And just advocate for yourself.
You mentioned earlier on having an agent. Would you recommend having an agent for other athletes?
Yes. And in fact, my agent, Tyler, in this last like 2 weeks, I've given his contact to like 5 people. I'm super lucky to have been one of his first 2 athletes. So I've worked with him for like 2.5 years now. And having someone on your team, to do that with, to like go through this process is huge. Having an advocate for you that only is looking out for you. And then also, what was I going to say? Oh yeah. Like, growing with someone too. Like Tyler and I have gotten to know each other really well. And like, there's been growing pains sometimes, figuring out what types of partnerships worked for me. And then like another thing is like, at first he was doing all the brand relationship stuff. And I realized that didn't work for me because then I didn't know the brand that I was working for. But I highly recommend finding someone to represent you as an athlete. Even like it's worth every penny. But I will say, there's a lot of snakes out there. So be confident in who you talk to and like, don't sign a contract either without knowing exactly what you're signing. The manager, the agent that reached out to me in 2017 was like, he was going to take 25% of everything, including prize money that I got, including like random bonuses. Like, stuff that he didn't negotiate any money that I was going to make. And, you know, he sent me this contract and that was in the fine print. And luckily I had a lawyer friend that like was like, let me look over that, you know, and he just like was super pushy about it. I didn't even know him or anything about him. And he called me up and was like, this is what we're going to do. Here's who I've talked to for you already. And I'm like, what do you don't know me. How could you possibly talk to anyone for me? So like, make sure you're, you know, I'm lucky. I feel like I have the best agent in the business. You know, the other thing that I was going to say is like, the benefit of having an agent is like, they'll call you on it when you're messing up. And like, he was sympathetic to, I had just like extreme personal life stress over the last 2 years. And he understood that. But when the time was right, you know, he was like, all right, like, you gotta change, you gotta step it up. You're, you know, he basically told me that like, this opportunity to be this professional athlete was not coming back if I lost it. He was like, brands talk. If you lose Brooks, you know, you're not going to get re-signed. And, you know, that was a really pivotal moment for me. And I thought I was really trying hard, and I'd like come out of this personal life stress and I was trying to get back into training. But I just like didn't know how really. And just that one conversation, just being called out by someone who knows the brands and someone who knows you is like, you know, and is just like a professional, you know, he's good at what he does. It changed everything for me. And I got my life together. I started, you know, organizing my day. I got help, you know, part of it is I needed professional help, to help me like conquer some stuff that I was dealing with. And like, you know, everything changed like within a month of that conversation. So, you know, all good reasons to have an agent. That's a big one.
That's awesome. I think we'll end with this. You had a great recent blog post. I think you might have been summarizing the most recent BRAD episode, but you talk about this balance between passion and professionalism in training and racing, which I thought was a really great thought experiment. I had never put it in those terms before. The reason I bring that up is, you know, we talked about UTMB Mexico earlier. I'm curious in that context, what your ambitions, your plans are for like 2023 and beyond. Like, what do you want to accomplish from an athletic standpoint in the sport in the next few years?
Yeah. You know, that's like such an interesting question. And I have these like really big goals that I am chasing, just like I was chasing a win at Western. But the biggest thing is like, I'm running to the goals like I was at Western, you know, I was running to that. And so my goal for 2023, like leading up to Puerto Vallarta, 100, I've had, you know, a very good training block despite challenges. And I have been, you know, methodical and gotten things in, even when it seemed like the schedule wouldn't allow. I've made it a priority, and made like the little things a priority. You know, I had like, for people who don't know, like I broke my back in 2015, and that takes an extreme amount of physical therapy all the time to be, you know, running 80 to 100 miles a week in training. That takes an extreme amount of care. And like, you know, to continue the amount of professionalism to take care of that kind of stuff, and just do it and not make excuses for it. Like, you know, you're not going to get everything done all the time, but like it has to be a priority if like racing is a priority and racing healthy. So like I want to race really healthy, which I haven't done in a very long time. Like even Western States, Grand Canyon, I had like all this nerve pain, but at least like I wasn't crippled. Leadville, I started to like 2019 is when I really started to unravel. Um, and then I just like, this is the first time that I've been able to take the steps back, and it's been slow and it's been good. So continuing to do that and feeling as good as I have been the last couple weeks, and then racing hard with a lot of heart, and without like, in the past I've had a habit of, it's been like self-sabotage, like not setting myself up for success,
Yeah.
even though I really, really want to. And it's not intentional. And, where I've talked about ADHD a little bit. And that's something that I've learned in the last year that is typical of people with ADHD. Even if they really want something, it's like the starting of it or the transitions have been really hard. So like getting ready for a race, not leaving that till like, 8 p.m. the night before the race, or like not leaving, stuff like that, or like getting ready or or travel, like, oh shit, the race is next week, I got to book a flight, stuff like that, and just being prepared. And I think overall, just being intentional about all of it, which I haven't been. And I think going after these goals really unabashedly and without any self-sabotage to hide behind is what I hope for 2023.
Amen. Well, I want to say before we go how much I appreciate your openness and your willingness to share your story. I saw a tweet the other day. It was from a guy named Dom Grossman, who, fellow prominent runner in the sport. And he was remarking on the Aravaipa film that just came out about Eric Sensman running the Cocodona 250, and Tim Tollison's video about dealing with body dysmorphia. And he basically says, like, what a great time in the sport, because we're having conversations and we're making content that we couldn't have made even 5 years ago, because, the theme then was all about like the glorification of the positive as opposed to celebrating the tragedy that can often be undercurrent to all of that. So I don't know. I really think that this is an important conversation to have, and I appreciate you, willing to be public about it. And it's just a great time for you too, like the podcast, the athleticism, everything. It seems like things are coming together, and it's all well deserved. We'll make sure to link to it all in the show notes. But is there anything else you want to leave the audience with before we go?
No, I thank you so much. This has been a blast. You're easy to talk to, so it was fun. Thanks for chatting with me.